it's really important to think about where you're going to connect with your buyers and the difference between the different centres of fashion. Paris, for instance, is a very, very, very different centre of fashion from London. Paris attracts British designers, yes, but it also attracts a certain type of designer from all around the world. And the reason that they're attracted is because there's certain shops around the world who will focus on a certain city, and then that creates a momentum. So it creates a kind of identity for that city and what the city represents. What you have to accept, though, when the buyer comes to an exhibition like that, is that there's a certain aspect of the hunter-gatherer in the buyer's instinct. You're basically, you want to cruise around and look and think and formulate ideas in your head, and you can't simply go to the nicest looking stand and think, oh yes, this is for me, make an instant decision. It's not really a good way to formulate an idea of what you're going to put into your store. And if you do start to talk to the buyer at that point, then the last thing the buyer wants to hear is a hard sell, because it can be a turn off. Because the important thing is that the buyer is thinking about the whole market. They're thinking about merchandising issues when something might be absolutely incredibly beautifully creative, but the buyer's got to think, well, what else have I bought, and how could I merchandise that in my store? The buyer's got to think about local pricing issues too, because there's a huge difference between the market in major cities, and that's something that I think when you're thinking about where you're going to place your product and where you'll take your product and which buyers to approach, you've got to think about the price point. Adam Kimmel started his career by creating a capsule collection that he sent off to Colette in Paris, and they bought it. And that was the very first thing that he ever created, a capsule that went to Colette. So not only was correctly pitched at the Parisian market, it was correctly pitched at the shop, and the price would be right. So that's really a case in point.
First of all, I would like to talk about how to protect intellectual property that you will create, designs mainly. I will talk about how these are brought around, whether they create automatically or whether you have to invest some time and money in actually registering these. I also want to talk about enforcing these rights. It's all very good owning lots of intellectual property rights, but often if you don't spend time and money enforcing these, they can be worthless essentially. And I also want to talk about when it's appropriate to enforce these rights. I think a lot of people's gut reaction is, I created that and you've used it without my authorisation, so I'm going to sue you and I'm going to chuck everything at you. But actually, I think it's quite useful to be a bit commercially aware and think, well, is it actually worth me spending time and money pursuing that? As disappointing it is when someone rips off your hard work. And we also need to take into consideration the assets that you have to pursue infringers, because it does take money to go to court and to take action against people. And if you don't have money, then that's going to limit the amount of things that you can do.
There is a distinct difference between collaboration and working with. I think when you're working with, say, a design agency or a photographer or a filmmaker, it's here's the brief, can you fulfill it? And in those sort of circumstances, when you're working with someone in that capacity, there's kind of little or no room for the sort of change of ideas and the sort of the input from both parties. And I think what's important about collaboration is that it is ideas from both parties, and that's what makes the better product. And I think what makes it successful in this kind of industry is that it opens it up to, especially as a new brand and a new designer, it opens up your product to another brand's existing customer base, which I think is really important in expanding your own customer base, your own network. And I think that's maybe one of the, that's something I touched on being unsuccessful, because I think that consideration with the brands that you collaborate with is something that has to be taken into consideration quite a lot. The brands that you work with have to, I think they have to be along the same lines as where you're working, and they have the same sort of similar values that you possess. There's no point kind of working with someone who's completely different and don't really believe what you believe, because you'll just end up kind of butting heads and something that, you know, there's always going to be an issue on price and about who the customer is at the end. And if you're working with someone who is at a similar price level, who have a customer base that can possibly get into your product as well, then it'll definitely work and you'll be really creative. But if it's something where they're saying, actually, no, this is far too cheap, it's never going to sell, it's not working, then it's not a route that's worth pursuing. So I think that not all collaboration is successful. I think that it has to be very carefully considered. But I think when you get it right, it can be really, really great.
One of the things that I still come up against over the years helping designers, you know, from when people used to come and see me desk side at a magazine and say, I've made this, what do I do next? To now is they still sometimes forget to include budget for themselves within the pricing plan. So, you know, when we say things like putting your cash flow and your budget together, it's really about putting together your needs for the year. Or even, we were talking earlier about the fact if your business is going to be seasonal, then, you know, spring summer 2016 is starting now, really, in terms of trend analysis and all these kind of things. And then obviously by the time it sells and then you get your money, that's like a full year and a half later. So you need to kind of in terms of budget, put together what you need, and then which fabrics you're working with or materials you're working with, and then what are the costs of the production of that, and how are you going to get that made and all the rest of it, and work up to your product price. And then you'll probably need to go back to the beginning again and kind of revisit some elements of it to tweak it. Quite often that's how, I'm sure some of you will have seen new product that comes in, and, you know, the wholesale price is just beyond what a store can afford to buy. It's a real challenge at a young stage of business. You know, regardless of age and experience, it's a big challenge. You're launching a new product that isn't sold anywhere, and you know, it's just about making sure that you haven't forgotten the key things like your mobile phone, your food, your rent, and all that sort of stuff needs to be in that. Unless, of course, you do the second or third job, which I know I did for a while.
Putting together a business plan is very important, and you must think of everything that you're going to have to spend money on, and look at your cash flow as well. What money you're starting with, if any, when you expect to get cash into the business, and what the bottom line in terms of cash will be.
I've been involved with Scotland Redesigned. They picked up on me in 2012 when they took me to New York, and we done a showcase there, and also in Glasgow, and now I'm involved with them back in Glasgow and sort of where it started. And they've been incredibly supportive. There's a lot of things in Scotland to nurture and sort of grow businesses. But I think the great thing about Scotland Redesign is they're trying to get us business. You know, it's not just about press. They're trying to make sales for us. You know, I'm also involved in their Ocean Terminal shop over in Edinburgh, where we're selling our work. You know, where people can support us and buy our work.
I'm part of limited edition really to showcase my work. It gives me a great platform basically to get the brand out there. It's an amazing opportunity to be a part of in Ocean Terminal, in such a beautiful store next to loads of really, really talented designers, and it's great to have somewhere that customers can come into a proper store, buy my products, because at the moment, well, before this they were just kind of online or other small pop-up shops. And I think it's such a great opportunity because it's on for 3 months. You know, it's not just a weekend pop-up or anything. So it's great. So you can change the stock around, change the display around as well, get a chance to be in the window and things like that, which is great.
What I was interested in this, in that I can see the creativity and the design in the print design, and I absolutely get the kind of fast to market, ever-changing part of that, but with as somebody with pattern cutting skills, you are choosing not to deal with that part of it. So I'm wondering if there's any sense of compromise in there, and maybe there isn't.
I think it's good to hone in on a specific area. So if you're just focusing on prints, it's good to not have to worry about the sort of manufacturing point of view and pattern cutting point of view. But if I did want to mix it, the opportunity is there.
Yeah.
But looking at it from a business point of view, it's good to have an efficient model.
It's the whole atmosphere within the manufacturing unit, and there's always a vibe, and it's the machinery, the clunk, the noise, the smell, everything that us textile nerds get really excited about. And it's appreciating the effort as well, and comparing with when, yes, I've visited many factories in China, Turkey, Mauritius, Hong Kong, Portugal, and every country has a very different vibe, but it can feel quite soulless in some respects, and they're just basically going through the motions, whereas I feel that it's not just going through the motions here in Scotland. They're putting some emotion into it as well, as and I think that just creates, as the designer, when you receive the end product, you're very excited about it, because you know everybody that's put a little bit of something into it, you know, right down to the ladies that are linking it, and the fact that, you know, they're always on my Facebook page and saying, oh, it looks great, and I really enjoyed, you know, putting that together and things. So yeah, it's very personal. But at the end of the day, you've got to desire it. So there's no point in using local factories and knitting up something that's not desirable, because the fact that it's knitted locally in itself is not going to sell. So that whole, you know, oh yes, that's beautifully hand knitted and da-da, but if it's not what you want, you're not going to buy it. So, but I think what I add is just a little bit more of an appreciation to it, rather than, I like to think, yes, they've bought it because they like it, but, you know, they can appreciate it as well as like it.